What's up, everyone? So my name is Denzel, if you already don't know me. And I was requested by one of my YouTube subscribers, shout out to you, Luna, on my ENFJ problems, paradoxes, and patches video on how to develop your functions as an ENFJ. So I decided to take up that question and give a riff on this. I haven't necessarily written down any notes or anything, but I'd like to think that just going by function and working on myself for the past 5 to 6 years, I can definitely give you guys some hints and tips on how to properly develop your functions, and from at least my experience. And then on top of that, my channel has a lot of different resources on how to do that, such as a video that my friend David and I did, who's an INFJ, on developing introverted intuition. And then I interviewed my friend Emrys, who's also an ENFJ, and we talk a lot about the different functions in those videos as well. You see videos, collaborations with Megan Lavoda and I, who's a very popular ENFJ, on YouTube. And so, all of these different videos you can go and check out. You can even check out my podcast with Antonia Dodge and Joel Mark Witt of Personality Hacker, where we talk about me as an ENFJ male, and even me and David having a video on being NFJ males and how we're with that. But to actually develop each and every individual function, I think that I haven't made a video specifically about that, so I would definitely take up this opportunity right now to go ahead and do so, starting with FE, extroverted feeling, also known as harmony, by Personality Hacker. If you do not know about these functions, I have a playlist called Cognitive Functions 101. You guys can go check that out, and it'll teach you all about the cognitive functions from my school of thought, and it'll just catch you up to speed. But if you're already familiar with it, I'm going to be using that type of terminology a lot, so just make sure that you keep up. So the first function of the ENFJ is extroverted feeling, also known as harmony, or FE. And for me, I often describe it most as knowing the exact buttons to push in the exact order to get a desired emotional reaction from an individual or a group of people. So it's always being aware of people's emotions, emotional state, and it's often understanding, especially the interplay and nuance of our interconnections with each other. So as an ENFJ, that's our dominant function, meaning that that's our powerhouse. That's our strongest function. Being attuned with all of these things I just mentioned above, plus social norms, social values, knowing the temperature, the emotional temperature of the room, what's usually allowed and what's not allowed, how to influence that in a way. And just because a function is your dominant does not mean that it's developed. It may not even mean that it's healthy. Now, of course, your auxiliary function, from my school of thought, is the function that you're supposed to most develop, regardless of whatever type that you are. However, that does not mean that you don't stop developing your dominant function as well. I think that if you're born with something being a talent, that's good, but there's a difference between having talent and then having skill. Being an ENFJ, we're all born already with the talent for extroverted feeling. It's our dominant function, so we're pretty good at it. We're pretty, fair at knowing how it's used, etc. But in order to develop skill with it, I recommend things such as mediating. I recommend things such as actually observing interpersonal dynamics, observe emotional temperatures in rooms. When you have a guess on how people may be feeling, go and ask them, how are you feeling? When you have a guess on how a relationship is whether it's platonic, whether it's romantic, whatever it is, when you start thinking of these things, start going to confirm your thoughts. Don't just keep it at don't keep it at a theoretical level. Know when you're actually right about what you're feeling, and know when you're wrong about what you're feeling. So I think that's a very big thing to keep in mind, to know when you're using when you're using that extroverted feeling function. Try to gain a very strong accuracy in it. Try to understand if this is even a desired emotion that everybody in the room wants to feel. I also want to recommend people start using the like FE dominance, so ESFJs can learn from this as well. Creating a space where not only it's harmony, but also know that harmony does, in order to get to harmony, a lot of times you have to have conflict. And this is coming from a 9, an Enneagram 9. I know, like, for example, a lot of IFJs who they try to like keep the peace as much as possible by like, no, we just don't talk about that, because they know it's going to start something. But sometimes you have to allow yourself to get through whatever is about to be started in order to get to that true harmony. So you have to know the difference between fake harmony, where everyone's just like, keeping things under the rug and not talking about certain things, versus actually like true harmony, where it's like, okay, I'm bringing this thing up because this is something that we have to discuss, we have to get through. And hopefully you're dealing with mature people, and you yourself, most importantly, are mature enough to be able to deal with the stuff that's going to be going there, because FE always comes with TI, which we're about to get into. And I believe that FE at its highest creates an environment or an atmosphere for where thoughts, like the TI thoughts and all of that, can be brought up, and then we can all refine our process of thinking. We can refine our opinions on things. We can vocalize what we think, what we feel, in a safe space, and we do not have to feel like we're going to be judged for it in a bad way or in a critical manner, or we're going to be ostracized from the group. So I think that FE dominants who have learned to really develop this function, especially as ENFJs and everything, that's a very big skill that I would recommend that you guys learn. This is going to go for all of the functions, to be honest, but the lower that it goes, the more that you want to the lower that it goes, the more that you want to make sure that you're not over focusing on those functions. So with FE being your dominant function, there's several different facets. There's several different faces of FE, just like with every other function. And I encourage you to sorry. This takes so long. Okay, so back on track. I encourage you as an FE dominant to learn about all the different facets that FE has. Don't just know about the one trick pony, like, FE is good at understanding people's interpersonal dynamics. FE is good at like knowing what to say at the right moment, kind of thing. Like, know every single nook and cranny that FE contains, and continue to learn about it, continue to develop that FE. That's how you develop it, by becoming aware of all the different things that FE can do. I made a video one time called the Avatar Acumen, and the concept is explained in that video, but essentially it's you looking at people of the same personality type from your past, from history, or even in our present era right now. So ENFJs, you can look at famous ENFJs or even fictional ENFJs and see the ways that they use their FE, and then try to embody that, try to bring that into your arsenal as well. So as you learn about all the different ways that FE can be used, then you also start to learn how to use FE in those ways, and then use it to the best of your ability. And this goes for all of the functions. So yeah, I highly recommend that for not just FE, but all the functions, but especially FE being your primary. Learn all of the different things that FE can do, and then make sure that you do those things. You learn how to do those things. It's going to take time. That's what development is. It's a lifelong journey. But with every day, you're getting better and better. It's better to learn these things now than when you're like 60 and you're just now getting into that type of headspace. So now, introverted intuition, which is the ENFJ's auxiliary function. I think that some great ways on developing that is, of course, I would say having a lot of solitude and alone time. So as an ENFJ, you prefer naturally to connect with others and getting into the head of others over like now connecting dots of all the information that you received. So one kind of like difference between the ENFJ and the INFJ in my experience is that the INFJs, they prefer to gather a certain amount of information and then they spend like their whole lives like connecting those dots that they've already of the patterns that they've already like gathered. But in order to gather more patterns as an INFJ, then you have to interact with more people. Now, with the ENFJ, it's reverse. They interact with so many people, so they have so much information, but they don't spend enough time in solitude allowing those patterns and things to emerge and to be able to understand, like, wait a minute, I've gathered this from this interpersonal dynamic and this from that interpersonal dynamic. I think that there's a pattern here. This is what that might mean, and this is what it could mean for long term. And then maybe if I do this, and maybe if I do that, and maybe if I start saying this, maybe if I start doing that, there you go. And this could improve humanity. So as an ENFJ, if you want to develop that introverted intuition, I highly recommend finding a lot of time for solitude, but do not neglect your time, of course, connecting with other people, because then the more that you've connected with other people and you've gathered that information through your FENISE, all of that, then the more that you're gonna have to be able to connect within yourself when you spend that time in solitude. Another thing that I'd say is also getting into the mind of other people, getting into the perspectives of other people, understanding so richly and so deeply where they're coming from and why they believe whatever they believe, so that way you can understand how to empathize with people, how to persuade them if necessary, how to, in a way, just understand how they're going to even respond to certain things. Like, okay, because I know that you're coming from this school of thought, that's interesting, so you might be triggered if I say something this way, or you might also thought this, you might also thought that. And this is going to take some time and refinement. But the more that you get familiar with other people's thought processes, then the more that it's going to become like a second language to you, where now patterns that will involve such a thing will just come a lot more quickly. And so that's another big thing that I want to push as an ENFJ to definitely work on when you're working on your introverted intuition. And of course, this is the function that you're most supposed to work on as well. And so, like I said, this is supposed to be like a quick overview video, and I'm trying to just get through it like pretty quickly. But if you guys ever want like actual coaching on how you as an individual can specifically develop as an ENFJ or whatever personality type that you are, then definitely be able to know that you can hit me up. I have links in the description with my email. If you just type in like coaching session, profiling session, whatever, and then you email me, we can plan a time for that. But yeah, anyway, introverted intuition, and I make sure that you spend time in solitude, make sure that you're jumping into the thought process of other people, and then also make sure that you're allowing yourself to trust your gut. When you have a feeling about something and you may not know why you're having a feeling about that, go with it, and then after you go with it, start analyzing, wow, why did that happen? Because now you'll become more familiar with when your intuition is right and when your intuition is wrong. And that's another thing that will come a lot within ENFJ as well. Ooh, I should have said this to that person. And that's one thing also, like as an ENFJ, a lot of times I found for myself that I'm like, dang, I really should have said something, but I thought that this could have been one of those few times that I'm actually wrong. And that's not saying it in a boastful way, but Jamila herself can tell you, like, no, Denzel is like almost always right about certain things, especially when it comes to social dynamics. And somehow, a lot of times I just don't speak up, and then there's trouble with that. So a lot of times, like, you want to know, like, when your intuition is right. And you have to become familiar with it so that you can trust it and knowing when to speak up, and then also knowing when to be quiet and trust timing. That's a big thing for introverted intuition. Knowing timing, allowing yourself to build up that time, that whatever vision that you have, whatever goal that you're trying to attain, whether it be a short-term goal or a long-term goal, you have to understand the implications. You have to look into the impressions of that. Well, implications is a better word for this. You have to be able to understand where that seed is coming from, and then you have to know when it's going to be in what stage. You have to be able to test the trends, the air. You know, like how when people are like doing like paper airplanes or whatever, they're testing like which way the wind is blowing. They kind of put their finger in their mouth and they go like that. There's like a figurative way that the NI user kind of like does that. You have to like see like the emotional temperature plus, you know, the specific trends that are in the realm. And I can't, that's the best way that I can explain it, because NI is just a very abstract thing. But yeah, become very familiar with that. And once you become familiar with it, then that's when SE, as a tertiary function, your extroverted sensing, now hops into action, because then it now is like, okay, we have projected and charted enough territory to now we can hop into action and we can know how to go about doing this. So as an ENFJ, because extroverted sensation or SE is your tertiary function, it is not your strongest function. So therefore, you have to rely more on NI. A lot of ENFJs, they tend to jump right into extroverted sensing. They just jump right into action. They act very prematurely on things. They don't think things through long enough. They may think things through a little bit. They allow their NI to go up to a certain level, like maybe like 60 to 65%, but they don't allow themselves to get up to like, I would say a good 80 to 85% is where you want to be as an ENFJ. And then that rest of the 15%, you allow SE as your extroverted sensing function to take control, because it's able to handle that 15 to 20%. But if you're leaving it like a whole almost 50%, that's not, in my opinion, very recommended. And so what you want to do is you want to spend a lot of time like reflecting NI, because NI and SE always come together. It's a polarity. So you want to spend a lot of time in solitude and reflecting and understanding which way the wind is blowing, and, you know, like how things are going to play out, and like really thinking about that. And then once you've come to a comfortable level of like understanding how things will play out, you hop right into action, and then you allow yourself to navigate. And if something falls out of, you know, what you planned, then you will now be able to when something falls out of plan, then now you'll be able to improvise enough. Your extroverted sensation will be able to improvise and act enough on its feet to be able to handle that 15 to 20%. And this is where I say that you're kind of following your intuition. You're allowing your intuition to guide you. Even though it's like a combo of NI and SE, I think that NI and SE are both like intuitive in a sense. Just like with high extroverted sensation users, they just instinctively or intuitively know like how a ball can like be hit and moved and everything, or like how to move their body in a certain way. Like they don't know how they know, they just know, which is the influence of NI. So in the same sense, we have that influence of SE, but NI is still overpowering that. So make sure, again, that you spend a lot of time with that NI. And then when you get into SE, then you'll know like when to also like hop in. And of course, SE, usually when it's higher, then it's able to look at things for what they are, like on an empirical level. For you as an ENFJ, because you have introverted intuition as a higher function, then I recommend allowing yourself to read deep into things and trusting the implication of things. But don't go too deep, because sometimes when you go too deep into things, then you start losing the reality of the situation, which is what extroverted sensing is supposed to help you do. It's supposed to help you keep grounded. So it's still allowing you to have like that like understanding of what's going to happen in the future, or what could happen in the future if you caused it to happen, but at the same time you want to still remain grounded so that it can actually be realistic, and not something that's just too abstract that now you can't even bring it into fruition in the real world. And then lastly, introverted thinking, also known as accuracy or TI. That's our inferior function. And one thing that I'll say is that even though it's our inferior function, this does not necessarily mean that we are illogical. It often means that we just prefer connection and human understanding, like the intricacies of human dynamics, and emotions and values, over stripping that for just raw zeros and ones, and data. And so, but that once again does not mean that we are not logical. We just prefer interpersonal, like the observation of interpersonal human dynamics. So one way that I could say that you can develop your introverted thinking as an ENFJs, first of all, I always talk about how your auxiliary function is kind of like feeding like a baby, where the more that you feed a child, then the more food falls to the floor oftentimes. And then if you have a dog, the dog comes and eats more of the food. So the fatter the child is going to get, the fatter the dog is going to get too, because it's getting more food. So introverted thinking could be seen as the dog, and the child could be introverted intuition. So the more that you're feeding your introverted intuition and trying to develop that, naturally your introverted thinking will also be developed. You will now start forming your own opinions and thoughts about things, even if they're contrary to what society is already saying. And you'll now know why you believe certain things. You'll also understand why society believes whatever they believe, and you'll be able to kind of like pick that apart and then give your own reasoning for things. Whether it's right or wrong, you'll at least have this like consistency. I also advise building integrity in your TI. And this is something that Antonia Dodge told me that I've apparently done, which has made my TI the way that it is. And I think that in essence, what that means is just pursuing and seeking truth, so much so that you remove your own personal feelings from that. Like, okay, I firmly believe in XYZ, but if you can present to me information that'll prove that XYZ is wrong, or that your information just makes more sense and it's more logically consistent, then, and you've like convinced me, then I will adopt that, because I'm in pursuit not of whatever I just want to believe, but what actually may be the closest to the accurate truth possible. And so once you have that type of like mindset, then you don't have an ego fixated on being wrong. Instead, you're so focused on actually being right that not in an egotistical way, but because you want to be right, you're very quick to release wrong answers. So when somebody presents to you an answer that may seem more plausible, then you are quick to be like, wow, thank you, that makes sense. Now that you've convinced me that my previous answer was wrong, I will now start to adopt this mindset instead, regardless of how long I've held on to the previous mindset. So higher TI users are always rooting out certain data. They're always rooting out like whatever could be inaccurate or whatever. And a lot of times, how they say like follow your heart? For TI, it's kind of like the same thing, only it's more of like follow your mind. And so for ETPs, for example, they have TI right above their FE. And ETPs such as Antonia, sometimes they have to think, okay, my introverted thinking is telling me that it makes more sense that like the religion of my youth right now, I don't really bang with it, like I don't really believe in the things that they believe. However, my extroverted feeling is saying, but even though you don't believe, pretend to believe so that you can still have friends, so you can still have community, blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, okay, now you're conflicted. Do you go with your mind, your heart, your TI, and what you actually believe to be logically consistent, or are you going to continue to stick with the group? Now, of course, as a higher FE user, oftentimes we choose to just stick with the group. However, there's a way to align this. FE and TI, regardless of what other people be saying a lot of times, your dominant and your inferior function do not always have to be in opposition. In fact, I think that very healthy, mature, developed individuals have learned to integrate them. They're polarity for a reason. And so if you've integrated these things, shoot, now you're able to have a group of people, a community that also believes in the things that you believe. It's hard because now you've had to leave the previous community that you've had, but then you'll be able to find more like-minded people. And then you can build a community there. And now you don't have to betray your TI or your FE. You can have both. You can have your cake and you can eat it too. And so it's very good to really understand what you believe and then continue to stick with that. And then the more that you understand what you believe and why you believe what you believe, regardless of just your emotions, but speaking from a very logical standpoint, but also not in a self-righteous, almost like I know that I'm right and therefore nobody can tell me otherwise kind of standpoint, but just like this is what makes sense to me and this is why I believe this and this is why I believe that. But I'm open to changing my mind if you're able to persuade me and convince me that your answer is actually accurate, regardless of however you feel and regardless of however I feel. If you can get to such a mindset, then I think that that's where an ENFJ is operating at their highest, because then they're able to also provide the rest of the group with accurate data, or at least accurate processes, or refined processes and continuous processes that are being refined to receive accurate information. So yeah, that's my quick riff on how to develop as an ENFJ. And if you, once again, have any questions and you want to have coaching or anything like that, definitely let me know. Leave your questions in the comments. And I think that's about it. I'm done.